In the first 2 episodes of this series, we followed the historic Carpentersville to Yorkville trolley system, traveling by bicycle, automobile, and foot from Carpentersville in North Kane County down through West Dundee, next passing through the extensive street railway system of Elgin, ending up at the former Elgin State Hospital along State Road, Illinois Route 31.
In Part 3 of this Fox River Trolley series, we pursue the path of the old Fox River Trolley, continuing south along Illinois Route 31, the former streetcar route, through South Elgin, visiting the remarkable Fox River Trolley Museum, an operational remnant of the original Aurora Elgin Southern Traction Railroad, and then to Coleman, a key interchange of the Fox River Trolley and the Illinois Central Railroad. We'll complete this leg of the journey passing over the storied Five Islands Bridge.
Leaving the Elgin State Hospital, we follow the Fox River Trolley route via automobile as the line passed alongside Illinois Route 31, a busy road today. We first passed the Morgan stop, named for Sherman Morgan, who owned a truck farm south of the hospital. Next, we passed the Kerber Packing Company stop and siding to our left, where Charles A. Kerber built a large meat packing plant on the west bank of the Fox River in the mid-1910s. Along this stretch, the trolley line was to the west of the highway to our right. We then passed by Gulick's stop, named for Alfred J. Gulick, who owned a large dairy operation in South Elgin. Next up is a series of trolley stops in quick succession as we arrive in South Elgin, including the South Elgin siding, the South Elgin Hotel stop, the South Elgin main stop, and then finally the bridge stop at State Road, near the center of the village of South Elgin.
South Elgin's origins go back to the same time period as Elgin and other Fox River towns, to the 1830s and 1840s. However, it went by a different name back then. The first references to the town, on early maps and local newspapers, give it the name of Clinton. However, when the townfolk applied for a U.S. post office, they likely learned that this name had already been registered for a post office in DeWitt County in central Illinois. And so instead, the first U.S. post office here took the name of Clintonville in either 1852 or 1853, with the curiously named Greenleaf M. Woodbury as the postmaster.
The person referred to in the town name, Clinton, is somewhat obscure. A few later sources suggest a James Clinton, an early settler, although his name is not among the earliest purchasers of property from the U.S. government in the mid-1840s. Seemingly, the only candidate in the area appears to be one James Clinton, living in Rutland Township, Kane County, Illinois, about 10 miles to the northwest, in the 1850 and 1860 U.S. Census, a farmer born in Ireland in 1824. Yet another later source suggests that the village was named for DeWitt Clinton, a former governor of New York in the early 1800s, who died in 1828. However, as the village origin was a few decades after his death, and since Greenleaf M. Woodbury was from Vermont, this explanation does not appear likely. Whoever this Clinton person was, they did not have a lasting impact on the community, as the village moved to change the name of the U.S. Post Office, as well as the town name, to South Elgin in 1876.
However, the new name South Elgin caught on very slowly, with newspapers, maps, and official documents continuing to refer to the community as Clintonville for decades thereafter. A primary reason was that the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, which had placed a depot there in 1853 when the railway was part of the Fox River Railroad, refused to change the name of their Clintonville station, despite numerous pleas from the South Elgin Town Council. Not until the summer of 1907 did the railway finally relent. And by this time, another railroad, the Aurora Elgin and Chicago, had placed another station and substation in the northeast corner of the town in 1902, naming their new station Clintonville, a moniker which remained until the railroad closed down in the late 1950s. Even though James Clinton was only a tenuous figure in the town's origins, his name smeared and stuck like peanut butter.
In its earliest days, Clintonville was bustling with activity, and even began to rival its older sibling, Elgin, to the north. Its primary industries included agriculture, dairy production, milling, and quarrying. By 1855, the village already consisted of approximately 60 houses, 3 general stores, 2 large grist mills, 2 schoolhouses, 1 paper mill, and 2 distilleries. One local newspaper dryly commented, "The sound of the workmen never cease, even on the Sabbath," as might be expected with 2 distilleries and no church.
But the town's fortunes diminished in the latter part of the 19th century, when a series of fires, likely arson, destroyed much of the town's vitality and commerce. The series of suspicious fires so vexed the community that in 1902, the mayor of the village, Vintringa W. Patton, skittishly shot and killed a neighbor boy whom he mistakenly thought was torching his mill in the middle of one stormy night. It brought negative attention to an already beleaguered community. The town's economy and population languished at about 500 residents for decades, until the late 1930s and 1940s, when it finally began to shake off its earlier troubles.
The Chicago and Northwestern Depot, which had lent to the town's identity crisis, and which was situated on the east side of the river, between State and Mill Streets, to the west of the tracks, stood until the mid-1960s, when it was finally taken down. Meanwhile, a little more than a mile to the northeast, the CA&E's Clintonville Depot and Substation still stands resiliently along Kenyon Road and the Illinois Prairie Path, after almost 1¼ centuries. The unassuming brick structure, once a vital link to the introduction of electricity in the area, has been home to the Valley Model Railroad Association for about 70 years. You can learn more about the AE&C's Clintonville substation in a series that we published a few years back.
By the year 2000, the village of South Elgin had grown to more than 16,000 residents and has added several thousand since, presently reaching beyond 24,000. Today, its primary industries and occupations include healthcare, manufacturing, finance, retail, scientific and technical services, construction, and mining in the form of the Fox River Stone Quarry.
From South Elgin, our next destination on the trolley route is just a short distance further south. Through South Elgin, the trolley traveled along the east side of the road, and we can see clear evidence of this as the old trolley tracks start to emerge from the roadway less than 1/4 mile along LaFox Street. The tracks lead off the road here, a few hundred feet to the east, heading towards the Fox River.
Here we are greeted by the sight of boarding platforms and quaint depot buildings, fronting an extensive rail yard to the south, and shaded by a few magnificent specimens of oak trees, said to be hundreds of years old. Just beyond this sheltered grove are lines of vintage railroad cars, of varying colors and style, with a few large rail yard buildings off in the distance.
This is the Fox River Trolley Museum at 365 South LaFox Street, Illinois Route 31, just a few hundred feet from the Fox River, with the South Elgin Dog Park and County Park as neighbors to the east. The facility and railroad is an authentic segment of the original Aurora Elgin and Southern Traction Railroad, built 130 years ago, and is still operating since those early, heady days of trolley travel. The railway has been serving the community as a living museum since the 1960s, delighting young and old, celebrating the primary means of transportation in the Fox River Valley in the late 19th century to the middle of the 20th century, the Fox River Trolley.
The museum has a collection of 30 antique trolley cars, railroad cars, and locomotives, most beautifully restored and of varying vintage, from the late 1880s to the early 1970s. Most of these railroad cars are fully operational and travel along a route of a few miles, from the museum's north terminus, named Castlemuir, to their south terminus, Black Hawk Station, located within the John J. Duer Kane County Forest Preserve. This trackage includes about 1.5 miles of the original Fox River Trolley route, which formerly continued south across the Fox River, but today bends west with the river to Black Hawk Station, a modification made in 2002.
The museum is staffed by 40 passionate volunteers, both young and old, most of which acquired the railroad trade hands-on, learning while doing, and sometimes trial and error. The work involved can be physically demanding, laying new ties and rails, maintaining and restoring century-old machines and vehicles, and requiring many trades and much know-how, everything from electrical engineering, diesel engine repair, seat reupholstering, window and glass restoration, and detailed painting. And above all, volunteering requires a passion for these vintage trains and their operation, with volunteers serving as ticket agents, train engineers, brakemen, motormen, conductors, section hands, shop workers, and tour guides.
Ben, is your pole up? Okay, I'm gonna get this one down.
The museum typically operates their trolley for museum visitors on weekends, starting from Mother's Day through October every year, with special events for holidays. Visitors should check the museum's website for additional details and up-to-date information. For us, the museum staff could not have been more welcoming on our multiple visits, and was kind enough to assist us in our journey by giving us a ride along their historic segment of the former Fox River Electric Road. They even allowed both Brian and I to operate one of their beautifully restored CA&E train cars, which was an exhilarating experience, given the power, weight, and acceleration of these somewhat innocent-looking vehicles.
In the trolley line days, the Castlemuir station would have approximated stop number 54, a somewhat less charming name. Today, we pull out of their Castlemuir station heading south, powered by overhead trolley lines, with electrical current originally provided by an electric substation acquired from Commonwealth Edison in the mid-1960s. Although the museum's electrical equipment has long since been modernized, their vintage substation harkens back to the early days of the Aurora Elgin and Fox River Electric in the early 1920s, when the railroad split off from the AE&C in bankruptcy proceedings. Now silent are 600-volt General Electric rotary converters, transformers, and vintage control panels, chock full of dials, relays, switches, and meters. Although antiquated, This type of machinery was vital to the operations of these electric railroads, as well as to the electrification of the many towns and cities along the railroad route, and would have been standard equipment in places such as Clintonville, the Elgin substation, and Prince Crossing.
As we travel along the scenic west bank of the Fox River, we pass by 3 more former trolley stops, numbers 53, 52, and 51, situated about every 1,000 feet, where a sparse local population could have found easy and affordable transportation. Amidst this beautiful scenery, along this quiet stretch of the trolley system, one wonders how this museum and facility came to be. How did this somewhat obscure segment of the railroad manage to survive after abandonment 90 years ago in the mid-1930s? Surprisingly, the answer lies with the Elgin State Hospital, which we discussed in the previous video, as well as the Illinois Central Railroad and the Coleman Station stop and siding, which we are now approaching, just south of the Illinois Central Bridge.
Although the Aurora Elgin and Fox River Electric abandoned most of their line in 1935, they had been delivering coal and other supplies via freight cars to the Elgin Asylum and State Hospital since their earliest days of operation in 1896, when it was the Carpentersville, Elgin, and Aurora Railroad. The CE&A built an interchange with the Illinois Central at Coleman, as well as extensive sidings at the Elgin Asylum, enabling the Illinois Central to deliver 3 hoppers of coal to the Coleman siding every 3 days, which were then transported via the trolley line to the Elgin Hospital. A few other large businesses were also served along this route, including the Kerber meatpacking plant, just south of the Elgin Hospital.
When the AE and FRE closed down their electric railroad line in 1935, they continued to operate this small portion of the railroad with a few electric flatbed engine cars. But in 1946, they acquired a General Electric 45-ton switcher engine, number 5, to pull the freight cars for the hospital and other businesses along the 3.5-mile trackway, which was used until the closure of this little railroad in the early 1970s. The number 5 engine has been remarkably well maintained and continues to be used as a prized piece of equipment within the museum's rail yard.
Just beyond the Illinois Central's tall railroad bridge was the Coleman stop, which has a surprisingly long and rich history. Coleman Station came to be when the Illinois Central Railroad decided that they wanted a more direct route from Iowa into Chicago via Freeport in the mid-1880s. The Illinois Central began planning this new route under the auspices of a subsidy company, the Chicago, Madison, and Northern Railroad, sending out surveyors in the summer of 1886. By early 1887, the CMNN had acquired all of the necessary land for a right-of-way, nearby extending from Plato Center in Kane County to Wayne Center in DuPage County, and from thence on into Chicago.
The largest landowner on the west bank of the Fox River at that time was the estate of Sumner Coleman, a successful farmer who had passed away in 1882 and who had owned over 500 acres, most of which lay on the west bank of the Fox River. The Illinois Central came to terms with Coleman's family in 1887, not only for the right-of-way through their property, but for an additional 260 acres of land, for about $60,000, or about $2.7 million in 2025 money. The IC planned to put a depot at this location, with the hopes that a small community would spring out of it. And they also planned to mine the large gravel pits in the west portion of the Coleman property. In the spring of that year, the railroad prepared the new roadbed, creating a significant cut on the west bank on Coleman's property, and creating a large ridge on the east approach of the Fox River.
They then constructed a sizable iron bridge, 50 feet in height and 500 feet in span across the river, using more than 200 laborers, including a few dozen Italian immigrants, who likely did the masonry work. The Illinois Central Bridge that we see today was upgraded in 1921 due to the newer and heavier trains, and is now owned by the Chicago Central and Pacific Railroad Company. The first trains passed through Coleman in the summer of 1888, bringing passengers and freight from the east and west. Like many locations along the Fox River in the late 1800s, it also began to gain attention as a scenic picnic spot along the river, with one local newspaper commenting in 1890 that Coleman Station is getting to be a noted resort for picnic excursionists.
Fast forward a few more years. The tiny hamlet was blessed with a second railroad in the spring of 1896, when the Carpentersville, Elgin, and Aurora Railroad graded a new roadbed, laid tracks, and installed electric wires along the lower riverbank beneath the imposing iron IC bridge. By midsummer of 1896, the first trolley trains were running between Elgin and Geneva, and with great frequency, especially on weekends, which saw 2 train cars packed with picnickers and sightseers every 30 minutes. The CE&A's Coleman stop was located just to the south of the IC bridge, on the west side of the tracks. And a set of wooden steps would have led up to the IC's Coleman depot above, enabling passengers to easily change between the two lines.
But the CE&A also quickly saw the freight potential for the interchange, and promptly built a siding from their tracks to the south of the IC bridge, leading up the grade to the Illinois Central line just west of their depot. They then offered freight service via the interchange siding to various businesses along the Fox River, including the Elgin Hospital, which quickly signed up in the autumn of 1896. This freight business proved to be one of the interurban's more dependable sources of income in the ensuing decades.
After the purchase of the Fox River Trolley System by Cleveland capitalists in 1900, and its union with the newly built 3rd Rail Division in ensuing years, the AE&C had created a vast electric railway, a transportation triangle anchored by Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin, and their auspicious interurban network boomed. The early 1900s and 1910s were the halcyon days of the railroad, with rapid expansion of lines, branches, services, and patronage. But alas, it didn't last. By the late 1910s, the railroad had overextended, especially given the regulatory price controls in place and the advent of the Great War in Europe, which significantly weighed down the railroad's financial prospects and put it into receivership by 1919.
Coming out of receivership, reorganized as the Aurora Elgin and Fox River Electric Company in 1924, the revitalized streetcar railroad had high hopes for success, and for a few years enjoyed some degree of prosperity, untethered from its larger but younger sibling, the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin, formerly the 3rd Rail Division of the AE&C. But the Great Depression, along with the rise of automobile usage, brought the Fox River Trolley System to its knees. By mid-1935, passenger service was discontinued on the railroad, and most of the line was abandoned, torn up, or sold off, the AE and FRE now transitioning to being a bus company. However, they retained the 3.5 miles of trackage from Coleman to the Elgin Hospital, as that was the only way that the bus company could meet the needs of the hospital, the packing plant, and a few other customers along this route. In 1948, when the AE and FRE sought to offload this remaining portion of the railroad, Bob DeYoung, then a 39-year-old Chicago dairy businessman who knew little about railroads, decided to move his family out of the big city to Elgin and purchase the niche railway from the bus company.
DeYoung, who had learned the railroad business by doing, continued to run the Aurora Elgin and Fox River Electric as a one-person business for a few decades, working with no set schedule for his customer delivery runs. However, in time, the Illinois Central began to scale back their operations at their Coleman station, as this relatively small business was becoming less worth their while. They replaced the original depot building in 1942 with their new standard Type B building. Then, a few decades later, in the mid-1960s, they sold and removed the Coleman depot outright. DeYoung's freight operation, just a few years later, was hit hard when the Kerber meatpacking plant closed down in 1970, and the Elgin Hospital stopped using coal as fuel for their power plant a year later, in 1971. These two body blows to the small railroad were too much to sustain, and DeYoung's railroad had to close down, with his last freight trains running in 1973.
Fortunately, he had an immediate buyer for his railroad, that being Relic, the railway equipment leasing and investment company, a group of interurban and railroad enthusiasts. Formed in 1959, the Relic Group was sparked by the alarming disappearance of regional interurbans, such as the Chicago Aurora and Elgin, and the Fox River Trolley, and decided to take action in order to save at least a small portion of these endearing historic railroads. By 1961, the group had worked out an agreement with Bob DeYoung to allow them to store their train cars in his rail yard and to operate their trains on his trackage during weekends, when there was no freight traffic. With this small toehold on the west bank of the Fox River, they opened their trolley museum on the 4th of July in 1966, taking visitors on short trolley rides for 50 cents.
In 1978, the Fox River Trolley trackage that remained from the Elgin Hospital to the Relic Trolley Museum was finally removed from the streets, as it was not being maintained and represented a safety hazard. The small but growing railroad museum was rebranded as the Fox River Trolley Museum by 1980. A few years later, in 1984, a new car barn was built to house their restoration activities and to protect their vintage train cars. In 2002, collaborating with the Kane County Forest Preserve and the village of South Elgin, the Trolley Museum completed a significant modification to their southern trackage. Prior to this, the museum trackway extended towards the Five Island Bridge, where it had originally crossed over the Fox River as part of the AE and C line. However, in 2002, they rerouted this trackage westward, extending the railroad by about 1,800 feet and creating a new destination and terminus at the Black Hawk Station, at the southwest corner of the John J. Dewar Forest Preserve.
As part of their interurban collection, the museum has also added a few station buildings from the former CA&E Railroad, including the Wayne Station Building and the modest Hollywood or Renwick Building, which once stood along Raymond Avenue to the south of Elgin. And the work has not stopped there, as the museum continues to expand and improve their facilities. Most recently, in late 2024, with an all-volunteer workforce, the museum broke ground on a major addition to their car barn, adding 50 feet in length to the north of the structure. The addition will give them far greater space to work on train car renovations, as well as a place to store their many priceless vintage rail cars. They hope to officially open this upgraded car barn in September of 2025.
There is little left of the Coleman stop today, and the IC's Coleman Depot is long gone. However, the siding which once carried large amounts of freight traffic to and fro still exists, at least partially. Passing beneath Stearns Road, which was built and opened fairly recently in 2010. The siding traveled up the grade from the trolley line in a wide arc. The trackage has been removed north of Stearns Road, although there appeared to be some ties remaining in the ground. It's rough going from here, as the former trackway is now overgrown with scrub, brush, and small trees. We emerge into the former Coleman rail yard and continue along the siding to where it joined the Illinois Central line. The former Coleman Depot building stood just to the east of this spot, on the south side of the tracks.
We will now depart Coleman and head south towards Five Islands. Leaving Coleman Station, we continue on the trolley line, first passing under Stearns Road, then into the former freight siding that served in that capacity for more than 70 years. We soon arrive at the road not taken earlier, but this time we will head to the south along the former rail line, today the Fox River Trail. And we will use bicycles, saying goodbye to the miraculous Fox River Trolley Museum, as the former railway travels only a few hundred feet further in that direction.
The bridge ahead of us was known as the Five Islands Bridge, so named due to the several islands in the middle of the Fox River along this stretch. At the north end of the bridge, on the west bank of the river, was located stop number 49, appropriately named the North End of Trestle Stop. Notice how utility poles continue to provide electric power along this path, just as they provided power to the trolley 100 years ago. The bridge makes use of one of these small islands in order to shorten the span, with two bridges bearing on the tiny island, each trestle 300 to 400 feet in length, reaching diagonally across the Fox River for some 800 feet in total.
Work on the original Five Islands Bridge was begun by the Carpentersville, Elgin, and Aurora Railway in the spring of 1896, with wood timbers and wooden piles, as they worked quickly to establish a link between Elgin and Geneva. The bridge was completed just a few months later, in June of 1896. This wooden bridge proved sufficient for the early trolley cars, which were light in construction. However, within 5 years, the bridge design was already a concern, as the Aurora Elgin and Southern Traction had begun to use heavier rolling stock, and early on had plans for an iron bridge with concrete piers and abutments to replace the original. But as time passed, the AE&C found that this bridge, in spite of its lightweight engineering, and despite being battered every spring thaw by ravaging ice flows, was relatively low in priority for new capital expenditures, and would simply have to do for at least another year.
In the spring of 1904, the ice flows were so bad that a major portion of the bridge sagged precipitously near the water and angled at nearly 45 degrees from side to side, making the trestle impossible to traverse by rail car. Instead, train cars would drop passengers off at each end of the bridge. They then had to labor their way across by foot, many on the verge of slipping into the icy water, where another waiting train car would pick them up from the opposite bank. Newspapers noted that women seemed to be far more adept at making this dangerous crossing, while most men floundered about and often required assistance.
It was not until 1911 that this bridge was finally re-engineered and replaced, with the approaches and bridge raised in height, supported by 19 concrete piers and 4 abutments, replacing the battered wooden piles, and with iron replacing the wooden beams and girders. The date of the Five Island Bridge can yet be read in the island's south abutment.
Such a long span of narrow bridge, and in such an isolated location, could be a dangerous place for those caught unawares. In the early spring of 1904, in the middle of a cold and snowy night, an intoxicated Edward J. Keeshan and his friend were thrown off a southbound train car by the conductor as a result of disagreement over the fare, some distance south of the river. The two men had boarded in South Elgin, thinking they were traveling north, only to find that they had instead traveled south, being taken further from their homes in Elgin. On attempting to cross back over the bridge on foot, the teetering Keeshan fell into the icy water, but clung tenuously to a pier for hours, waiting for help to arrive. Although rescued sometime later, he died on the ride back to Elgin due to exposure.
Almost 3 decades later, in 1931, a young fisherman, Emil W. Hansing, from Ontarioville in DuPage County, went fishing along the bridge with his older brother and a friend on a midsummer afternoon. As the three walked out to the island on the narrow bridge, the friend decided to stay there and fish a while the two brothers continued crossing eastward. Moments later, the trio heard the whistle approach of an eastbound train moving briskly at 40 miles per hour. The two brothers, still some distance from the shore, made a dash for the eastern bank, with Emil's older brother in the lead, who jumped into the water as he neared landfall. But his younger brother behind him, Emil, stumbled at the last moment, falling directly into the path of the oncoming train, which attempted to stop by slamming on its air brakes. The unfortunate young Hansing was hit and killed outright by the heavy vehicle.
Marked by this tragic event, we come to the end of this segment, passing over to the east bank of the Fox River at stop number 48, the Five Island stop of the historic Fox River Trolley System. In our next episode, we'll continue our trolley saga south, into the communities of St. Charles and beyond.
As always, many thanks to our Be Historic channel community, our subscribers, our super thanks contributors, and our generous Patreon supporters. And of course, a huge shout out to our friends at the Fox River Trolley Museum, who helped tremendously in the production of this video. If you have not already done so, please visit the museum and consider contributing to their worthwhile fundraising activities. If you're enjoying these videos, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share. And if you're so inclined, consider supporting our channel via Patreon. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you, in a manner of speaking, in our next video adventure.